Back in the 1790s, when the street level was much lower, Little Compton Street used to be a big part of London. However, by 1896, the area was demolished, the street level was raised, and an office block was being built.
It's literally on an island. It's pretty cool, isn't it?
This is only the start though, as we're going to be going into some of the darkest secrets of London. To start, in 1992, a bomb struck the city of London around this area, meaning it was completely destroyed. And in 1995, when they were clearing the area, they found the remains of a estimated to be 1,600-year-old girl. This girl was estimated to be 13 to 17 years old, and no one knows why they died. Although being called a tree, this place never actually had one, and instead was an execution site that was also used for criminals to say their last words. Similar to the last one, this is also another place people got executed. Throughout the years of 1381 and the last execution in 1780, there were around 120 executions recorded. The reason it's so known is because of the high status prisoners that were executed, and a few people that were killed in this area were killed by a group of people called the Peasants' Revolt. This was a revolt made in 1381 after socio-economic and political tensions generated by a Black Death in the 1340s and high taxes and instability within local leadership. What finally caused the major uprising was attempts to collect unpaid poll taxes by royal official John Bampton. After this, court records were burnt up, local prisons were opened, they destroyed the Savoy Palace, they set fire to law books and buildings in the temple, and killed anyone associated with the royal government, which could be seen in the execution list from the Tower Hill execution site. Back in 1483, there was a supposed murder of 12-year-old Edward V and his younger brother, and where they were was dictated by their uncle. When they had disappeared, there was an attempt to rescue them in late July of 1483, but that also failed. Other than the disappearance, there is no direct evidence that the princes were murdered, and only one contemporary narrative account of the boys' time in the tower exists, as others are believed to be biased or influenced by Tudor propaganda. 4 unidentified bodies have been found, which are considered to be possibly connected with the events of this period. 2 which are at the Tower of London, and 2 which are in St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, but authorities have refused to allow either set of remains to be used for DNA analysis. The War of the Roses was another big series of civil wars against 2 different families over the throne, and in 1461, Edward IV managed to imprison Henry VI in the Tower of London and take his crown. This was then traded back and forth until Edward murdered Henry's only son in battle and imprisoned him again. And after losing 2 kingdoms and his only son, Henry died in the Tower during the night of the 21st of May 1471, possibly being killed under the orders from Edward. Not only that, but there's also a secret prison in the Tower of London, and also the crown jewels are stored in the Tower of London, but I don't recommend trying to steal them. Although it seems like a normal house from the outside, 50 Berkeley Square was once declared the most haunted house in London because of its high body count. A guest at the house started off badly when a scream was heard in the ceiling. He and his host ran upstairs to find a young maid gibbering on the floor of what was to be his bedroom. The maid is reported to have said, "Don't let it touch me," and for some reason the guest thought it was still a good idea to stay in the room, and who would have guessed something bad happened. Later in the night, a gunshot was heard, and then there was just silence. When the others had reached the bedroom, the guest's body was twisted and paled. And not only that story, but because of how many people had died or gone insane from the house, the council made it exempt from taxes, so try that next time you want to evade taxes. Don't, please. Now, although the first story is not confirmed, this last one is. Between the years 1859 and early 1870s, a man named Thomas Meyer occupied the property, and because he was recently rejected by his former fiancée, Thomas began to devolve. He stopped going outside, he barely slept, and just roamed the house night and day, mustering strange thoughts. This is also what skeptics believe was the reason for the folklore to exist. While most people were buried in normal cemeteries, unholy people were buried in the Crossbones Garden, and originally it included thousands of prostitutes who spent their whole lives there, but then it extended to paupers and criminals. However, by the 1850s, the graveyard was at a bursting point, with people saying it was completely overcharged with dead. The graveyard was lately abandoned because of health and safety concerns, and multiple redevelopment plans, with one plan being to build a fairground, which all ended up being fought off by local residents. In 1992, the Museum of London excavated around 150 graves and found out that 66.2% of the bodies in the graves were aged 5 or younger. During the post-war reconstruction of London, the Roman temple of Mithras was found. This was used to praise the Persian god Mithras, who was born from a rock within a cave, had unnatural strength and courage. The growth of believers in this god prompted the temple to be built, which remained in use until the late 4th century. It was originally built on the banks of the underground river Walbrook, which helped its eventual downfall as it ended up suffering from terrible subsidence which could not be kept good because of the lack of funds. When it was finally found in 1954, the site chosen and the quality of the reconstruction done to it was very poor, causing it to be wedged between a main road and an office block for 50 years, where until recent times it is now a museum you can visit. When King's Cross St Pancras was being created, there was a bit of a problem that they encountered. At the point, the main reason for people to go to St Pancras was for the church and cemetery, so because the railway owner didn't want people to be greeted by the dead, they had to do something about it. At the time, the cemetery held over 88,000 bodies, which wasn't helped by the fact that the cemetery was full of grave robberies and body snatchers. To fix this, an architect named Arthur Bromfield was hired, who then hired someone else, his assistant Thomas Hardy, to fix it. The way they fixed it was by dismantling most of the gravestones and adding a mass grave, which is where most bodies were dumped. In London, there's a grave for a dog named Jiro. This belonged to the German ambassador of Britain back in 1932, and after 2 years of being in London, the dog sadly died, causing a grave to be made for him. Although being called the Nazi dog, this is completely inaccurate, as while the owner was a representative of the Weimar Republic, which would have switched to the Nazi party, he didn't share the same beliefs, and although he was well loved in Britain, not a single member of the Nazi party attended his funeral in Germany when he died in 1936. And just so you know, the dog didn't have any Nazi beliefs either. Highgate Cemetery was first made in 1839 and was a part of making 7 large cemeteries in the City of London. When it was first made in the Victorian era, it was admired and visited a lot. This first dark part of the cemetery was the dreadful exhumations that sometimes occurred. One of the saddest examples of this was Elizabeth Siddal, who was one of these people who got exhumed. To give some backstory, I'm going to introduce Gabrielle Dante Rossetti. This was one of the people Siddal knew and how her name will be best remembered. When Rossetti introduced Siddal to his fellow artists, they used her as a model for their art, which quickly turned sour as Siddal nearly died because of the intense demands the artist placed on her. An example of this was when Siddal was made to lie in a bath of lukewarm water day after day, which caused her to contract pneumonia. When Siddal and Rossetti were married, it was not happy at all for Siddal because of her continuing health problems, which meant 2 years later she was dying, but not because of her existing problems, but an accidental poisoning of herself when she took too much laudanum. She was buried with many love poems from Rossetti and was exhumed so that they could reobtain and publish these poems. Another reason this place is known is because of some of the people that are buried here, from Karl Marx to George Michael. These two were along with an insane 170,000 other people in this one location, and all of these factors added together makes this, in my opinion, the darkest secret of London.